Good to see you. Good morning. Glad to see Tom and Bonnie back. So, last week, does anybody remember anything at all about what we talked about? One single thing. You're excluded because y'all weren't here. Oh. All this. I wish we had to. Down like this. What? Is that better? Can you hear me? Okay. Does anybody remember anything at all about what we talked about last week? See, this is a common thing that happens with all of us. We walk out those doors and 5 minutes later we don't remember a thing about what was said in here. Why? Yeah, maybe a little hint, it'll come back. But the whole purpose of a messenger, myself, standing up here, is to convey something to you that you can use in practical application. How do I live my life? Do I get outside and do a burnout in the parking lot? Whip out a big bottle of booze and start drinking and chasing around and being an idiot? Telling people there is no God? How about that? How many of you have friends that are atheists? Most of my friends are atheists. I will say this in my own defense, that from time to time I will speak up. And I'll catch the heat. I don't mind catching the heat on it. But the heat that I would catch is basically nothing compared to what some people did. What about Paul? What did they do to Paul? What about Peter at the end of the day? An even greater, huh?
They hanged him upside down.
Yeah, they killed him. There was an even greater example of that. Who was it? He spoke truth to power, didn't he? And power showed him, well, this is what we'll do. Well, who do you think gets the, and this is kind of a bad way to put it, but who do you think gets the last laugh on that one? Okay? So last week, we talked about mortality, death, to be blunt. Okay? Most of us in here right now, it used to be this far away for us. And then it kind of got to be like this. Now for me, it's somewhere around in here, and for some of you, it's right there, maybe a little closer. Finality of everything. That's what we talked about last week, was death. You know, and it made me think about it a lot. Why don't we hear preachers take this subject on head on? Because What is the totality of the Bible about? You will die. What'd you do with your life while you had a chance to do something with it? Why didn't you do something with it? To refer back to last week's lesson, it's been stated that there are only two things certain about human life. Anybody remember the two things that are certain about human life? Death and taxes. But I reversed it. Taxes and death. Okay? Same meaning. Went over a few things in Acts. I'm doing this as a review for some of you that weren't in here last week. Okay? One of the things I wrote here is mortal death is inescapable. Now notice how I phrased that. Mortal death. If you believe as I do, we've got an existence that goes on. When it ends, we don't know. We're not told. We just know that it continues after we turn into worm food. Okay? Here's another statement I wrote. It's after mortal death. When someone contemplates about this, what thoughts are thought? After mortal death, when someone contemplates about this, what thoughts are thought? Does reality really set in for us? Well, I would suggest in here, most of this audience, reality did sink in. Because you're given two choices, right? Serve self or serve who? Serve what entity? Serving God helps us to avoid what that entity says. This is what will happen to you if you do not. And that's intended to be a blanket statement. And it's intended to just hit you in the face like someone swatted you with a 2x4. Just pow. Wake up. Do something with your life that counts. Repeat again, reality hits us head on. Is there escape from what I did with my mortal life? Yes, there is. There absolutely is. That's why you're here, isn't it? Okay? Today's December 7th, 2024. I've forgotten how many years ago, but it's been a long time ago that death came to America's doorstep. What was called a surprise attack. Me and my wife were in Hawaii a couple of months ago, and unfortunately I got a little angry with my wife because I had the sum total of 3 hours and 30 minutes to go to Pearl Harbor and see all that was there. Didn't get to see much, but I did go over to the Arizona. Does anybody in here know what the black tears are? Have you ever heard that phrase? Well, when the Arizona went down, it had almost full oil tanks in it. And little bits of that oil seep out every day. Some more times than others. I think, where was it I read that if the oil tanks continue to leak at the rate they're leaking at right now, it'd take 42,000 years for the oil tanks to run dry. I don't think we'll be around at that point in time. I know I won't. But I searched and searched. I went from one viewing portal to another, looked at the outside of the boat and everything. The black tears. Why do you think they named it black tears? 1,100 plus men died on that boat in almost an instant. Reality came to America's doorstep, didn't it? And last night, I turned on the TV, flipping through the channels, and I stopped because there's one of the high water marks in movie making. The movie Gladiator was on. And I'm talking about the first one that was made, which was pretty much a remake of a movie that was made back in the 60s. But we had better photography and all this sort of thing, acting, all these things. But in this movie, it caught me that the existing emperor at that point in time was on a field of battle. And it turns out that this is true. Okay? Now, what words are spoken, I don't know. But these lines were given in the movie when the emperor, Marcus Aurelius, is speaking to the gladiator. Okay? He says, when a man sees his end, he wants to know that there has been some purpose to his life. Let me read that again. When a man sees his end, what end is he referring to? Well, this thing stops working and this thing fades away. When a man sees his end, he wants to know that there has been some purpose to his life. For those of us that have had our parents pass away, have you ever stopped to contemplate, what did my parents do with their life? Or what about my grandparents? And for those of you who have heard me speak through the years, I had one very influential grandmother. Well, both of them were influences. One for like, well, I don't know if I want to do that. But the other was, I want to do that. Mortality ends probably with me. I've passed a few of those things on to my daughters. But how much further will it go beyond my daughters? Now, some of us have big, extensive family recordings and things and historicity about that sort of thing. But for yourself, you have got to realize it all comes to an end at some point in time. Some sooner than others. So Aurelius says this finally about his life. He says, how will the world speak of my years in years to come? What will be said about you? Maybe 1, 2 generations, and it's all gone. Because if you think about it in all totality, in comparison to the gross amount of human beings that have set foot on this earth and lived their lives, how many are really historically relevant? How many of them have something written in a history book about them? These days, I find myself looking up old guys that I guess they're old guys now, but I find myself looking up a thing called an obituary. Yeah. And not long ago, I found one for my 14-year-old good friend that died that night in a motorcycle crash, which I don't think I need to elaborate on that. I've spoken to you all about that many times. 14 years old, I'm 1 block away and my friend dies. Do you think he knew that 1 second before he was driving on a motorcycle in the dark with no headlight? Do you think he was even thinking about that 1 second before he hit the side of that truck? So this leads me to this. Marcus Aurelius was a real person. This is not a movie made up thing. Okay? In the list, I had to look all this stuff up. In the list of Roman emperors, I believe he was 14th on the list. He ruled, if you want to call that, 161 to 180. That's AD, okay? Or CE, for those people that like to change things, okay? He ruled for 19 years. And what did he worry about when he could see death? He was on death's doorstep. What are they going to think about me? What do you think he would have thought back then? I made a movie. Small amount in a movie, but gee whiz, I'm still there. But there's still a statue that's in Rome for that guy. And for a long time, the reason why that statue didn't get destroyed is because they thought it was Peter riding a horse. Okay? It's interesting if you actually will study history and make application of history to self. Do you ever apply your previous history to self? BC, every once in a while, he'll say something about himself. Kelley would before. I know most of the preachers I've ever heard will say something about maybe in the bad old days. I ask this question. See if anybody can answer this question, because this is applicable. When did the Romans take over the Jewish nation? Anybody? 67 BC. 67 BC. 67 years before what we call, I guess, year one. I don't even know if year zero exists on that calendar. The thought just occurred to me. I've never looked it up to see if zero is there. But you have to have a starting point somewhere, don't you? So there's one, okay? Does anybody remember the name of the emperor that was, well, he wasn't really the emperor at this point in time, but he was the leader of Rome, or the Roman Empire. Maybe you'll remember it because there was a town next to this volcano that blew up in Italy. Remember the name of the town? Spelled a little differently, but it pronounces the same. His name is Pompeii. What do you think the Romans thought after they took over the Jews? As the Bible refers to people as being stiff-necked. Do you think the Jews might have been a little stiff-necked that here comes these basically alien heathens, the non-believers, even though the Jews were already living within some parts of the Roman Empire? Anybody remember who the first Roman emperor was? Augustus Caesar. Okay? He ruled from 31 BC to 14. Then we had all this stuff happen. But during Augustus Caesar's rule, we know that Jesus was born sometime in that period of time. And some historians say, well, year one is the valid year for when Jesus, because remember it was called AD. AD stands for after death. Okay? Jesus entered into this situation during this man's reign. Okay? Anybody remember who the emperor was after that? His name is Tiberius. Okay? And his end of reign came around 37. So Jesus lived during the time of two emperors. At that point in time, in the Romans' eyes, there was no higher deity than these guys, even though people realized they were mortals. But what transpired during this period of time? The Messiah came, and the Messiah basically changed the world, didn't he? Do you think that might have been part of the plan all along? Because what were the Romans? The Jews were the chosen people. What were the Romans? What were the rest of the world? The word starts with a G. Gentile. Non-believers. Okay? They believe in sticks and stones and things like Mars, all that. I've seen Roman movies where they give money to an empty bowl. For what purpose, I don't know. But they believe it'll help them out a little bit. You just think about this in terms of knowing the history. The chances that Jesus would come when the Gentiles were ruling over the Jewish nation. And what became of that? We got this guy named Paul. And Paul's mission statement came directly from Jesus. What did he say? You are a chosen vessel. Now, that's one of the words that I think of whenever I think of that particular passage. To who? To the Gentiles. And remember, he had to go and explain before the council in Jerusalem about all of this business. And who backed him up? Well, Peter did to a certain degree, but who was the head of that at that point in time? James. How many chapters of James do we have? We got one little jot, basically. And one of the most important passages in the entire Bible resides in that first chapter in James. It deals with how we think. It deals with how we choose. So, in this, we run across this word. It's called T-E-S-T. What is that? Test. He's been to college over here just recently. I'll tell you a true story. Kelley Roberts goes to play baseball at a junior college. He finds himself in a sticky wicket. You know, because he has to pass this particular math class. And he has to make like a mid-80 or something to be able to raise his high D up to at least a C to pass. Well, the night before, he goes and he makes this elaborate little cheat sheet about this big. You know how I can write small. Well, I've been practicing writing small for a long time. I wrote every formula that I could think of that I thought would applicable to that test. The teacher, Mr. Hood's passing the test out. He comes to me and he sees me with my hand like this. Now, I don't know if he saw that piece of paper or what, but he finished passing all those things out and he came over there and stood right there. I never got to use my cheat sheet. I flunked. I didn't get to play baseball. Lo and behold, if the next year I didn't find myself in the exact same spot again with the same professor. This time the test was at 8 o'clock in the morning. I went home, I took the book, opened it at page 1, and worked my way all the way through that book. Now, I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, because I'm no great mathematician. But I went in at 8 o'clock, everything's fresh. Same thing, he's passing it all out, comes back to me, sits there and watches me take that test. Everybody else has gotten up and left, and finally when the bell rang, test time's over, I turned around to Mr. Hood and I said, "Would you grade this right now?" He goes, "Sure." He had a big smile on his face. He goes over there, he finishes. I thought I missed 2, but it turns out I missed 3. And I remember I had to make a 92 on that test. I made a 92. And he looked at me and he said, "How did you do that?" I said, "I went home and I read the book." And he was just dumbfounded. I read the book. Do you make application? I think most of us in here do. But how serious are you with that application? How often do we get the word test? Tell you what, this came to mind while I was constructing this lesson. Turn to Genesis 3. It's the very first test. The very first test. Genesis 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, "Indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "From the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat. But from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die." Verse 4, the serpent said to the woman, "You surely will not die. For God knows in the day that you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Stop right there for a second. When did you first start to recognize the difference between good and evil? That's private. You don't have to answer that unless you want to. But we all came to that moment, some sooner than others. Else why would you be here? Verse 5, "For God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise." Well, let's stop right there and recall James, chapter 1, verses 12 through 16. I'm not going to read it for you. You read it. And if you don't understand it, come talk to me, come talk to BC, come talk to any of us that have studied the Bible for a while. It's blatant what that statement says, and this goes along with it, that the tree was desirable to make one wise. She took from its fruit and ate. She did exactly what God told her not to do. He didn't say you couldn't look at it. He didn't say you couldn't go around it, but he said don't mess with it, don't touch it, much less eat it. And she gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. He knew what he was doing, didn't he? Verse 7, then they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loin coverings. The very first example that we get of a test. That word test occurred to me sometime in the middle of the week in thinking about these sort of situations. When was the next test? One chapter later. Wasn't too long before we had the very first murder, didn't we? Over what? Jealousy? You can't have, I don't want God's affection to go to you instead of me. Those sort of things. The next one occurs, well, I left this one out, but I told myself I would remember it, but I don't remember chapter and verse. Those of you that can correct me on this or enlighten me, let me know. But what was Abraham instructed to do to his son? Kill your son. What did Abraham do? He had the knife right here, didn't he? Stop. You've passed the test. Is that simple or what? It's brutal, but it is a simple story to tell, isn't it? And we all know it, don't we? Now, I say simple. I mean, gee whiz, they had to trek a while, and, that probably wasn't a pleasant journey. Can you imagine what you were thinking during that journey, knowing full well what you were fixing to have to do? Does that bother you being a Christian, knowing what you have to do? What happens when it comes time for you to raise that knife? And I use that symbolically when you want to talk to one of your friends about becoming a Christian. For those of you that know me, you know I'm a blabbermouth. I talk a lot. Sometimes it's just absolutely nothing coming out of my mouth except hot air. Shut up, Roberts. I want to go somewhere else. Leave me alone. Well, I got a call from a high school friend of mine. Called me at 10 o'clock sharp. I think it was Wednesday. It was Wednesday. I did not get off the phone with that man until 15 minutes of 7 o'clock. Both of us were running our mouths just as fast as we possibly could. And I'm not patting myself on the back, but I know my friend Gary, he came down here after he got out of the military and lived with me for a couple of years before I got married. He wasn't a Christian then, but I was attending Laurel Heights, invited him several times, wouldn't go. Later on, I heard that he had converted and become a Christian, become a Baptist. Somewhere along the line, Gary's pretty much snuffed that out. And he's a year older than me. All of my high school schoolmates were a year older than me because I started school when I was 5 and they all started when they were 6. So I was a youngster compared to them. But I took advantage of what little time I could in that marathon blabber session of speaking to the man about Christianity and the use of questions. The use of questions. And I could tell from time to time, and when you're talking to someone, if you get that pause, that little pause, and if you do it long enough, you'll recognize it. Now, I'm not talking about talking long enough like idiotically like we did for 7-something hours, or however long that was, 8 hours, 6, I don't even know the math on it. But I'm talking about over the long haul, talking to people about, don't you realize what's coming? What does the world teach? Go back to Genesis 3. It's desirable. That apple is desirable. Eat of it. Eat all you want. Become a glutton for it. Now, what's the reference there? Let's look into this a little bit. What's the reference that I'm getting to? Let's become a glutton of the world or for the world. We just can't eat enough of it. What is it? No fear of God. It's a 3-letter word. Starts with S and ends with N. Sin. What is sin in the first place? Separation from God. Well, what separates us? Well, the sin does. But at its very essence, sin boils down to rebellion, doesn't it? What do governments usually do in terms of when a rebellion happens? They try their best to squash it. They want to get rid of it, don't they? I'll leave you to put a little bit of thought into that for yourself. So you know my penchant for definitions. Meant to get to this a long time ago. But test, I highlighted it in yellow. That means it's important in my little notes here. When it's used as a noun, a person, place, or a thing, it means a critical examination, observation, or evaluation. And out there to the side it says trial. A trial run. How many of you go in there and buy a brand new $100,000 car without driving it first? What do you think you'd do if you put down $100,000 for a car, drove it home, and said, I hate this thing. I'm taking it back. Dealership going to give you all that money back? No. Because now you're trying to sell them a used car. A trial. Next part of it, second definition. It says, an ordeal or oath required as proof of conformity with a set of beliefs. An oath. Now, I don't mean to be too far off the path here, but when you were baptized, you were asked a question. What was the question? Come on now. Do you believe? If you're a baptized believer, what was your answer? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. An ordeal or oath required as proof of conformity with a set of beliefs. We have agreed to conform to what this teaches us. This isn't some dusty old book that tells you nothing. This is here for our benefit, for your benefit. When I say our, I'm talking about a long time. Did any of the appointed apostles go and hide under a rock? No. They gave us an example to do what? To speak of our Creator, speak about Him and the demands. These are demands. These are the things that He wants. How many times have you shirked that? I have on a number of occasions. Hopefully not anymore. You're afraid to open your yap because someone may think, well, that's one of them Christians, or yeah, you don't believe that stuff, or now's not the time to say it. Sometimes all it takes is just a couple of words, and it makes all the difference in the world. Because where's the battle fought? Right here. Words. Words. When test is used as a transitive verb, it says to put to test or proof. To put to the test. Every day is a test. When you wake up, what do you think? When you go to bed, what do you think? Do you go over the day in your head? What did I do today? And when it's used as an intransitive verb, is to undergo a test. Undergo a test. How many of you is the last time you went into the doctor's office and said, we got to do a test on you? Last year I did whenever I got one of them gallstone, not a gallstone, but a kidney stone. A medical test. Does that kind of scare you a little bit if those words come out? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? A test. Well, the buzzer has buzzed, and I've come to about, I don't know how many scriptural references I have here. Probably would bore you to tears, but I will tell you this. In the Old Testament, and pay attention to this, this is the New American Standard. In the Old Testament, the word test, testing, words related to test, occur 153 times. In the New Testament, it occurs 152 times, almost equal with each other. Even test occurs, and I wrote it down here, in Revelation. Test occurs 15 times, 13 times in Matthew, 11 times in Mark, 9 in Luke, and 37 times in John. That one takes the cake all the way across. So we get a total of 307 times test is within the confines of the Bible. When something's that repetitive, what should that do for you? Sets off kind of an alarm bell, doesn't it? Did anybody in here care for taking tests when you were in college or high school or grade school? I remember I used to be, I hate tests. I hate tests. Proves how dumb I am. Proves I hadn't done my homework. I'm too lazy to do it. I'd rather be outside scratching around playing, being a boy. And all this comes back to, because we're going to pick this up one more time, it all comes back to the word D-E-A-T-H, death. Because it happens for all of us. It's an inescapable. And you know, for those of us who lived a long time, when we were kids, death seemed a long ways off, didn't it? And I'll tell you what, do the math. How many days are there in a year? 365, and every fourth year we got another one in there. So you could multiply 365 times 0.25, 365.25, times 80. And just do that on your calculator right quick. See how many days you got. It may seem like you're a lot when you're a kid, but when you're old, all of a sudden that big number's going like that. It's worthwhile to think about those things. If I've said anything in error, anything you have a question about, please ask me. Thank you very much.